Hello everybody, Adrian Plass here,
Yeah, and Bridget.
and guess what? We made it to the 40th recording.
We did, and you somewhat facetiously yesterday said you thought that we should get a ruby. Well, we did, didn't we?
We did get
Adrian?
one. No, I'm very pleased. Someone emailed and said, we heard you say you wanted a ruby, and she gave us one. So we opened the file that she had added to the attachment she'd added to her email, and guess what? There was a picture of ruby wax, and you know it's better to have one ruby, even if it's a wax one.
No, I think we
So,
got our comeuppance.
Thank you very much for that. It made us laugh this morning, which
really
is a
did.
really good thing.
Yeah, it
So
was.
thank you very much
Yeah.
for that. Thank you.
And we've been thinking, as I'm sure you have, of still all those images from the films and the interviews, all to do with VE Day, not just of the people who had connections with the forces in some way, but also the people who lived it out in this country under blackouts and quite difficult situations.
That's right. Yeah.
And we were thinking that for us, what are the costs and benefits?
All right.
weren't
Well,
we?
let's actually think about it. I mean, for 30 odd years, I, and then both of us, for some years now, have been travelling an awful lot,
Absolutely.
and we enjoyed a lot of it because we were meeting people, we were amusing people. Some things were a complete failure, but
And the travel,
Travel.
extraordinarily took us
Yeah.
all over the world,
It
really.
did, yeah,
some
yeah.
some to do with the charities we were involved in, and some to do with your books, which
right,
oddly
yeah.
enough popped
Yeah.
up in a lot of places
Yeah.
all over the world.
Australia, Germany,
That's
South Africa.
right.
We had an
New
amazing
Zealand.
time. But the price, I think the price, what do you think the price we paid for that was? That we spent our lives packing, unpacking,
Yeah,
you washing clothes as it happened,
yeah.
and preparing to go away again.
And
we-
missing lots of things. I mean, we tried really hard, didn't we, to get back for birthdays and things, but we missed lots of things to do with our community.
I think we missed out a lot on forming bonds
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
local
yeah.
community. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
is true.
Yeah. So
Um,
maybe that is one of the big benefits that we've had of being stuck in one place, even though we can't go out to see
Well,
them.
that's true, but we do have ongoing contact with people, which
Yeah.
I'm very grateful
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
And looking back at those early days, I remember some very odd journeys.
Well, you've never driven, have you? So they were all
No,
on the
I've
train
never
or the
driven.
bus.
But people who know what Swanwick is are going to laugh at this. But in the very early days, I was booked to go to Swanwick, which is a conference centre in
It's
near-
Hayes
near
Conference
Derby.
Centre, isn't it? Yeah.
And so I simply looked on the map and found Swanwick, and there it was in the south of England. So we lived in Sussex then. So I got on the train at Polegate and I went to Swanwick.
Yes.
And I got off at Swanwick and I went into the little place where the ticket office was. And I said to the man there, "Can you tell me where the Christian Conference Centre is?" And he said, "We haven't got one." And I thought, no, you just don't know. And there were a couple in the little office there. And if some people would make this a centre point of their testimony book, but it just happened there, I don't know.
No, it was certainly the centre point of this journey,
Well,
Adrian.
this journey. And they said, "No, you're talking about Swanwick in Derbyshire." And I thought, oh my goodness. But you know, I wasn't deterred. I went to into Southampton railway station and I caught the train to Swanwick, not to Swanwick, but wherever it was, and made my way to the actual Swanwick
What
place.
time did you get there?
I got there by 10 o'clock in the evening. Now, this is interesting, right? This was a prison fellowship weekend.
Oh, it was for
and
people who were
People
ex-prisoners.
who ex-prisoners.
Yeah, of
and
course.
one of them had wickedly gone to the bar that evening and had a drink. And there was a man there called, I'm going to try and remember his
Fred
name,
Lemon?
Fred Lemon,
Yeah.
who was quite well known at that time. He'd been a greengrocer and he'd become a Christian. And Fred had been lecturing them all on the evils of drink. So I can tell you, even though I was late, I have never been more welcomed in my life.
For all the wrong reasons.
Well, I don't know, maybe the right reasons. Anyway, I stood up and I did my stuff and made people laugh a bit. And old Fred Lemon was sitting in the second row, looking at me with his mouth hanging open, I tell you. And afterwards I thought, he's going to give me an earful afterwards. In the morning, I didn't see him till the morning, and he'd obviously been thinking through this very carefully, and he came up to me and he said, I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate you. And it was very, very nice to hear. So it was a terrible day, but it had a very good ending.
Well, then, of course, later on, we did get a car, and I was travelling with you, and on quite a lot of occasions, the family were as well. And I remember one occasion, one journey, where I was absolutely determined to get it right, because it was one of the first times we went to one of the big Christian festivals with all the family.
Yeah,
and I had spent weeks making lists. We were going to be camping, and children make lists. I mean, children have essentials like footballs and cricket bats and all sorts of other stuff. I had essentials like food and clothes and all the other stuff. Finally, we got into the car. This was pre-Kate, so it was 3 boys jammed in the back with loads of equipment.
Pre-Kate means before our daughter was born.
Before our daughter was born, yep. So we had the 3 sons and off we went. We went, I think, about 10 yards and the car stopped. Because of all the things I had forgotten, despite my lists, I hadn't put any petrol in.
Well,
so we'd run out of fuel.
To be fair, I hadn't thought of it either. But yes, that was a very, very bad beginning.
It was, and I don't think I excelled in the way I reacted to it. But it's one of those things that later on you look back on, and it forms a sort of truth in another connection. Because I thought about it and I thought, whatever plans you make and however many lists you make and however many things you get right, if you're running on empty, which lots of people are if they're very busy, then actually they can't move at all. And it became a sort of parable to me.
It was a stark parable,
It
wasn't
was a stark parable. Everyone was very grumpy.
Yeah.
I can't even remember how we managed to get the petrol, but I think it did become a bit of a parable for the fact that we can't love unless we get love to give.
And actually, those experiences are ways in which you run into truth, aren't they?
That's right.
And we mentioned, I can't remember how many days ago, about 40, that Richard Wurmbrand made the statement that truth is a direction, it's not an acquisition. And that's how you live. And in the Lincoln film, do you remember the Lincoln film we saw, which we loved, apart from the end bit, which was horrible? But Lincoln at one point was asked, we know where we're going, don't we? We have to go north or something. And Lincoln said, yeah, we know where north is. It's on the compass. The problem is getting there is something else, because we might find swamps or bridges that have been broken down. So it's not just knowing where you've got to end up, it's knowing how you get there. And that reminds me of another journey where I'm going to have to tell this very briefly.
This was another one on your own on the train, wasn't it?
I was on the train. I had to go from Polegate, which some of you will know, and I had to get to Portsmouth, right? So I go into I go from Polegate to Brighton, which was easy. Go in to ask about where to go next, and the girl in there said, yes, that's easy. You change at what was the next station along? I'll remember them. Anyway, something very simple. So I go out again, I look up at the board, and there was something else on there, a different place to change. And I thought, oh no. So I went up to the man who was sitting in a box at the end of the platform. They used to do that then. And I said, look, I've got to go to Portsmouth. And I've been told to change at 2 different places.
Was one of them haven't?
Haven't. No, not yet. We haven't got haven't
right.
yet. So I said, so where do you think I should change? And he said, Southampton.
Right.
So I said, oh, good, that's brilliant. Right, okay. So I get on the train eventually, and the man with the tickets came along. Now, this is where you have to relax the muscles of your credulity to believe this. I said to him, I'm going to Portsmouth. Can you just tell me, reassure me, where do I change? And he said, upstairs. Upstairs. And for one moment, you know how your brain tries to accommodate something that can't possibly be true. I thought maybe this train has another portion where you can go upstairs. But it wasn't at all. It was
like a bus.
Yes. When you get to a particular station, you get off and you go up the stairs and then you get on the train to Portsmouth. So after this agonized journey, in which I began to believe I could get off anywhere and just get on again, I arrived at Portsmouth and all was well. But it occurred to me that it was a kind of parable, because within the church there's a sense that if you can get people to the 11:30, or you can get them to a meeting, or you can show them this, or you can show them that, you'll make progress in their spiritual development. That
does sometimes happen, of course.
It does happen, but it's not the way it is. There was a phone, I'll show you. You might hear the phone in the background, and we are not going to answer it, so it can ring for as long as it likes. So, I think I mentioned before that old joke, the old story about when you stop and you ask the way, and an old yokel says, well, I wouldn't start here if I were you. And there's a great truth in that God meets people in very unusual places and ways.
We had a friend, just a delightful man, who was part of our home group, didn't we, years and years ago? And if ever there was an example
of this... The phone stopped, by the way, so you can relax.
Good. If ever there was an example of this, it was him. He was lovely, and one of the things we loved about him, and I know anybody who's leading a house group will appreciate this, he arrived on time. In fact, often he arrived early, and the other thing was he was very handy at doing things, so we loved that as well, because we've always been useless. He was so nice and so kind. So it was very puzzling that there was one whole area in Jeff, if you remember, where he wasn't lovely and he wasn't kind, and it was with people who couldn't pull themselves together.
Well, yeah, very judgmental.
If they were out of work, well, why didn't they get a job? If they were on the streets, well, it was their fault, and it didn't fit with the rest of them. And then we learnt that there were reasons for this, that when he'd been a little boy, his mother had become very ill, and he had been put in a children's home. Now, at that time, of course, nobody ever explained to children. They just seemed to think that it was fine not to tell them anything. So nobody had told Jeff what was wrong with his mother. And what they had said was that if he behaved really, really well and he was a good little soldier, then one day, and he didn't make a fuss, one day he'd be able to come home. And Jeff told us this one day about the fact that he had been a really good little soldier.
He came that day with something to say, didn't he?
Oh, yes.
He really did.
He did, yeah. And he was telling us, wasn't he, that you know, he never cried, never made a fuss, never put a foot wrong. He was a good little soldier. And one day he was able to come home. So as far as he was concerned, we began to realise being a good little soldier, never making a fuss, putting up with it, getting on with it, was the way to go.
In fact, he'd never cried.
He'd never cried.
Since then. And on the day when he told us this, he had come out of hospital a while ago, hadn't he?
Well, that's right.
And something had happened there that just changed.
Yeah, well, he had a cancer, didn't he? And it was one of those horrible cancers that runs really fast through the body. And of course we'd prayed for healing, and in fact we'd been to a centre for healing and prayed with him there. But it had just got worse and worse and worse, and he'd had several operations, I think 3 operations, hadn't he? Yeah. And any faith that he had in a God who was involved with him, or anything positive really, had gone. And one day he'd just come out of his operation, so he was semi-conscious, just coming round. Now, before he'd gone into his operation, I remember him saying that the person in the bed opposite, with just the little cubicle curtains around them, just at the sides, had been a very nice, quiet person. But now there was somebody who was the epitome of everything that Jeff couldn't stand. This person had been brought in off the streets. Why he was immediately in a bed, I have no idea. He was clearly filthy and had got some very nasty open sores. and he was screaming and shouting and swearing and
taking
trying
his
to
clothes off, didn't he?
trying to take his clothes off, trying to take the tubes out.
Yeah.
He was behaving, as far as Jeff was concerned, seriously badly. And Jeff told us when he was telling us about it, he said if he'd have had a bedpan, he'd have been over there and hit him with it.
Yeah, he'd have
He
finished
was so
him off. he
angry
said.
and so hurt. And then he heard the nurse, the staff matron, coming along the corridor, clickety-click. And he said he relaxed. He thought, she'll sort him. She'll sort him. Well, when he described this to him, he said it was like a little theatre, because he said the curtains were just drawn at the sides. Presumably they thought he was still out of it and wouldn't really notice anything anyway. And he watched the matron march in, and he thought, she'll have him. And then to his surprise, she sat down on the bed with this man, and she took him in her arms, and she stroked his head, and she calmed him down, and she whispered to him.
I think she sang a bit
I think
to
she
him.
sang
Yeah.
to him. And Jeff said, first of all, he just couldn't believe it. And then he felt God saying to him, you see that man, Jeff, with all those sores on the outside and all that filth? That's you on the inside. And what I want to do, I want to put my arms around you, and I want to cuddle you, and I want to ease all that pain, and I want to take away all that hurt and all that nastiness inside you.
Yeah, it was, and as he told us that, he cried
Oh, he cried.
for the
and he
first
cried.
time since he was 6.
He did. Well, he died soon after. He wasn't physically healed. But I think the truth of it is that Adrian and I have never really seen such healing. It was like somebody who had genuinely been reborn, been cleaned inside, and become the child that he'd never been able to be. It was fantastic.
It was a great thing to witness. It really was. And if you ask me why it doesn't happen that clearly to others, I've no idea. But Jeff's journey was a wonderful one.
Yeah.
And
he met God right at the end of his life.
he did. And you know, Jeff loved to laugh, and he would understand what I'm going to say to you now. I'm going to leave you with a little motto for your life. And it's this: in the great motor race of life, Jesus is the pits. And that's what Jeff understood on that day. So, good old Jeff. If we had a drink with us, we'd take a
celebrate
quaff for
him.
him and we'd celebrate.
We would.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, goodbye.
Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.